Palestinian death by PA police fire. Spokesperson for the PA Security Services says an exit in protest at Israel's killing of lots of Palestinians in protest along the Gaza border. Once warm relations started to decline after the election of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, an outspoken critic of Israel's treatment of the Palestinians as prime minister in 2003. The present Turkish president famously criticized ex-Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres while on stage at the World Economic Forum at Davos in 2009. In 2010, tensions increased when Israeli forces raided a Turkish ship that broke through an Israeli blockade to distribute relief materials to the Hamas-administered Gaza Strip. 9 Turkish activists were killed. The two countries, however, have in recent years made attempts to put their troubled relationship behind them as regional alliances shift. In a move towards reconciliation, Israeli President Isaac Herzog visited Turkey in March to meet with Erdogan. Mevlut Cavusoglu, Turkish foreign minister, was in Jerusalem in late May in what his then counterpart Yair Lapid called a new chapter in bilateral ties. Then in June, Israel and Turkey formally declared the restoration of full diplomatic relations, including an exchange of ambassadors. Erdogan has, however, made an attempt to reassure Palestinians and said in August warming ties with Israel will not weaken lessons support for Palestine. Now, residents have been asked to take shelter on Turks and Caicos Islands as a progressively powerful Hurricane Fiona heaves towards the Caribbean archipelago, leaving deaths and destruction in Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. The strengthening Category 2 storm forecast to become a Category 3 event by Tuesday afternoon, with winds exceeding 111 mph, that's 178 kilometers per hour, was on track to pass near the eastern end of the Turks and Caicos Island on Tuesday evening before heading for the southern Bahamas. On Monday, Fiona decided torrential rain on the Dominican Republic and left 1 person there dead after causing major flooding in Puerto Rico, killing 2 and causing widespread power blackouts across both the Caribbean islands. According to the United States National Hurricane Center, it was on course to become the first major hurricane of the 2022 season if it becomes a Category 3 storm. On the Turks and Caicos Islands, a British overseas territory with 40 low-lying coral islands and a population of around 40,000 that sits about 700 miles southeast of Florida, the government's National Emergency Operations Center, NEOCO, told residents of the 3 eastern islands to shelter in place and ordered businesses to close. Residents were packing food and water while shelters were being arranged. Foreign government distributed travel alerts for the islands, a popular tourist destination. Storms are unpredictable, Premier Washington Meesick said in a statement from London, where he was attending the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. You must therefore take every precaution to ensure your safety. Allied preparations were underway in the Eastern Bahamas. Fiona is on the track to knock the Eastern Bahamas on Wednesday, when it could have reached Category 4 strength. In Puerto Rico, a region of the United States, inhabitants were still experiencing steady winds, regular lightning and heavy rain on Monday. Fiona made landfall in Puerto Rico on Sunday afternoon, dumping up to 30 inches, 76.2 centimeters of rain in some areas. Pedro Pelosi, Puerto Rico governor, has cautioned it takes days before electricity is restored everywhere. Water service was cut to over 837,000 customers, 2/3 of the total on the island, due to muddy water at filtration plants or lack of power, officials said. The storm comes 5 years after Puerto Rico was destroyed by Hurricane Maria, which caused the worst power blackout in its history and killed 3,000. On Monday, U.S. President Joe Biden spoke with Puerto Rico Governor Pedro Pelosi, promising to add the support personnel sent to the island over the next few days. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, Administrator Diane Criswell would travel there on Tuesday. A volcano north of Tonga's major island has exploded 8 times in the past 48 hours, according to the Pacific Nations Geological Service, which has cautioned mariners to keep their distance from the area. The Home Reef volcano has erupted over the past 10 days, emitting multi-lava and shooting steam and ash at least 3 kilometers, almost 2 miles into the air, with 6 explosions recorded in the previous 24 hours alone. The Tonga Geological Services at the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources said on Tuesday, Home Reef's eruption presently poses a low risk to residents of Vavua and Haipai, 2 of Tonga's most populated islands. Pilots have been warned to use care when flying through airspace close to the volcano after the aviation alert level for the Home Reef was raised to orange, 1 step below an emergency, the Geological Service said in a statement. Mariners have also been asked not to sail closer than 4 kilometers from Home Reef and to look out for falling ash. Monitoring of the Home Reef eruption is ongoing, with regular notices issued on the status of the eruption, the Geological Service added. Seismic activity is fairly common around Tonga, a small archipelago nation with about 100,000 people spread across 171 islands. But warning levels were raised by 1 notch on Tuesday as the track of eruptions accelerated at Home Reef. Tonga was hit by the eruption of Honga Haipai volcano in January this year, which was one of the strongest in modern times, according to researchers from the University of Bath. According to local support workers, the blast, which felt like an atomic bomb, created a 15-meter tsunami that killed 3 people, destroyed villages, and detached Tonga's communication cables, leaving the country cut off from the world for weeks. Still going, Liz Truss, British Prime Minister, is anticipated to tell world leaders that the United Kingdom's backing for the Ukraine war effort in 2023 will meet or surpass the £2.3 billion, that's $2.63 billion that have been committed by London to Kyiv's fight against Russia this year. On Tuesday, the Financial Times reported that Truss would deliver the UK's hawkish message of sustained and considerable military support to Kyiv during a visit to the United States, where she is scheduled to address the United Nations General Assembly in New York City on Wednesday. The British Premier was also expected to use her speech at the UNGA to press Western governments to add their support for Ukraine amidst progresses by Ukrainian forces who are pressing the successful counter-offensive against Russian forces in the east of the country. According to the report, London's commitment of $2.63 billion in 2022 to Kyiv resulted in the UK becoming the second largest military donor to Ukraine, Downing Street told the FT. UK military aid has involved the provision of hundreds of rockets, 120 armored vehicles, 5 air defense systems, and some 27,000 Ukrainian forces have been trained by UK forces since 2015. The report also said that the largest commercial road move of ammunition since the Second World War was carried out last week and involved tens of thousands of artillery rounds donated by the United Kingdom that were sent to frontline Ukrainian forces. Ukraine said its soldiers have trooped further east into territory newly abandoned by Russian forces ahead of the ongoing Ukrainian counter-offensive, making a way for a possible assault on Moscow's occupation forces in the Donbas region. The Ukrainian leader Zelensky also hinted on Wednesday he will use a video address to the UNGA to call on countries to accelerate weapons and aid deliveries. More stories call for action in Myanmar amidst school invasion. Southeast Asian nations must resolve whether the 5-point agenda to end the violence caused by the February 2021 coup is still relevant and whether it needs to be changed, Malaysia's Foreign Minister Saifuddin Abdullah has said, as reports appeared that no less than 7 children had been killed in a military helicopter attack on a school. Myanmar was thrown into crisis when the military detained elected civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi and seized power. It has cracked down hard on any opposition relating civilian and ethnic armed groups fighting against its rules as terrorists and executing 4 political prisoners in July. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, brokered a 5-point agenda with Army Chief Min Aung in April 2021 that was supposed to end the violence, but the generals have disregarded it. Myanmar is one of ASEAN's 10 members, and the international community has been depending on the organization to take lead in diplomatic attempts to tackle the crisis. There has been no no let-up in violence since the ASEAN Agreement, and the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners, which has been tracking the crackdown, says closely 2,300 people have been murdered by the military since the coup. At least 13 people were killed on Friday, 7 of them children, after army helicopters attacked a school in a monastery complex in the northern central Sagaing region. The National Unity Government, NUG, made up of elected politicians who were thrown out of office by the military, accused the generals of targeted attacks on schools and called for the release of 20 students and teachers it said had been arrested following the air attacks. At the United Nations General Assembly, China faces pressure after Xinjiang report. Diplomats and human rights advocates are mounting up pressure on the United Nations to act over China's treatment of the Uyghurs and other mostly Muslim ethnic groups as Beijing tries to head off traditional scrutiny of what is ongoing in the northwestern region of Xinjiang. The call for action took place as world leaders assembled in New York City for the annual United Nations General Assembly UNGA meeting, and 2 weeks after the United Nations Human Rights Council found in a landmark report that China had potentially committed crimes against humanity in Xinjiang. Inaction is no longer possible. Ferdinand de Varennes, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Minority Rights, said at the forum sponsored by the Atlantic Council and Human Rights Watch, if we permit this to go unpunished, what kind of message is being propagated? A deputy U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Jeffrey Prescott, suggested the integrity of the institution was at stake in its response to China, saying how these atrocities are addressed goes ultimately to the credibility of that system, to the credibility of our international system itself. He said, it's deeply disheartening to see a country that has been so central to the creation of the modern United Nations system and enjoys its status as a permanent member of the Security Council so profoundly violating its commitment. Since 2018, when the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination first exposed that over 1 million people were being detained in a network of detention centers across Xinjiang, academics, exiles, and the media have revealed abuses from forced labor to family separation and the destruction of the Uyghurs' culture and religious identity. Beijing has recognized the presence of the camps, which it says are vocational skills training centers essential to deal with extremism. Reacting irritably to the statement of the Human Rights Council report, calling it a patchwork of false information and depicting it as a construction cooked up by Western nations and their supporters. Beijing issued its own 122-page rebuttal, and its diplomats are now lobbying others to try and stop the likelihood of more scrutiny by the Council of its campaign in Xinjiang, with China's ambassador in Geneva threatening to extract cooperation with the Human Rights Office without stipulating how. China's President Xi Jinping remotely addresses the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly in a pre-recorded message in 2021. The Human Rights Council is meeting in Geneva while the UNGA holds its annual gathering in New York. And in Africa, the International Monetary Fund reaches agreement with Mozambique that could release $63.8 million. On Monday, Mozambique and the International Monetary Fund IMF team reached a staff-level agreement on the economic and financial strategies that could help the approval of the first review of the program under the ECF arrangement. The ECF, also known as Extended Credit Facility, offers financial aid to countries with prolonged balance of payments problems. All quantitative and structural benchmarks set for the first review have been met, and good progress was made on the broader structural agenda. Looking ahead, the macroeconomic environment remains challenging. The authorities aim to continue implementing their ambitious economic reform agenda, including a sovereign wealth fund law, reform of public sector remuneration, and the amendment of the public property law. The agreement anticipates the approval of the IMF Executive Board in December, which would allow the disbursement of about $63.8 million. The Washington-based institution received the Bank of Mozambique BM response to contain inflation, which it called proactive. The IMF approved in May a €432 million loan to Mozambique, the first since it withdrew 6 years ago at the time after finding hidden debts in the so-called hidden debt scandal involving the government. Tunisia's Opposition Chief questioning postponed. Monday afternoon, two leaders of Tunisia's Islamist opposition party, Int'L, were encircled by supporters as they appeared for questioning before anti-terror unit in Tunis. The chief of the party, Raket Ghannouchi, and one of his deputies, Ali Larayat, are accused of sending jihadist militants to Syria and Iraq. Int'L strongly refutes the claims and supporters denounce a witch hunt. This is a new episode of persecution of those opposed to the coup, of which the target is to silence everyone, to destroy the image of the party and to defame us, Ahmed Kamiri, spokesperson of the Int'L party, lamented. This case opened with the summoning of the President of the Parliament and a former head of government, respectively Raket Ghannouchi and Ali Larayat, is a case fashioned out of lawyers. Late Monday said he was permitted to leave after 12 hours in waiting and his questioning postponed for Tuesday while his deputy remained in the quarters for anti-terror unit. Oppositions of the party and some politicians allege Int'L of having enabled the departure of militants for war zones after 2011 revolution. The party dominated political life at the time until a power seized by President Kais Saied last year. And finally, report says Equatorial Guinea abolishes the death penalty. Equatorial Guinea has abolished the death penalty after the country's president, Teodoro Obiang Nguema signed a new penal code into law. Obiang's son, the vice president, publicized the move on social media on Monday. I am writing in capitals to see this unique moment. Equatorial Guinea has abolished the death penalty, Vice President Teodoro Nguema said on Facebook. The decision will come into force in the 90 days following its publication in the official state journal and was approved in advance by Parliament, where all but one of the 100 legislators represent the ruling party. According to Amnesty International, the previous official execution in the West African country was carried out in 2014, but international non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and the United Nations frequently accuse the regime of forced disappearance within monarchy. 3 million inhabitants have below the poverty line, according to the World Bank. The death penalty remains legal in over 30 African countries, although only about half